This episode of MMA Nuts is brought to you by GoDaddy.com. Use code 249NUTS to get 249 domain registration or transfer. Defense Soap. Use code MMA Nuts for 15% off your entire order.
We transition as we're talking about testing and stuff.
Yes, definitely.
Can we go into marijuana a little bit?
Yes.
I know you guys test for it. What is your view on it? Do you consider that performance enhancing or what?
Well, I know that the main reason is the harm to the person taking it. We obviously are involved in a sport where there's dire consequences, especially if you are lethargic or your reflexes aren't where they should be. You could die. This is a very serious sport that we're dealing with here. And so we got to make sure these fighters, for whatever reason, whether it's drug induced or it's an injury or it's something going on in their personal lives where they can't focus right and they don't have the ability to perform to the standards they need to perform in the ring or the octagon or the cage that night, that they shouldn't be fighting. So that's the starting point. And that's what we asked them on the forum. This is a government forum under the penalty of perjury. List everything you've taken, prescription, over the counter, in the last 15 days. You might get knocked out cold. We need to know. The EMTs are going to have to work on you, try to save your life. Just if you or I went to get a surgery, a LASIK surgery or something, what have you eaten? When did you last eat? These are important aspects for them to know. What medications have you been taking? This isn't hide the ball time. This is the time where we're on your side here, and we got to make sure that A, you're fit to fight, and then B, if you get knocked out, that you're not going to be given something that's going to have a bad reaction with something that's already in your system, regardless whether you took it 10 minutes ago or you took it 10 days ago. And it's unfortunate we've had fighters lie out on that form, and it's I don't understand it. I don't understand. I understand if you took steroids, you're not going to put that on the form.
That'd be interesting to put it down.
We had people put stuff down, and we'll talk to them. Okay, when did you last take that? Okay, you can't take it anymore. You have to wait till after the fight. Even something as simple as aspirin, which you can't take leading up to the fight. Stick with Tylenol, and then once your fight is done, the next day you can go back to taking aspirin if that's what you prefer. But if you take it and you get hit and you get a bleed, it's going to make it worse, and it can change a bleed you survive to a bleed you don't survive. So it's very important just to be truthful first and foremost. I actually give a speech to the UFC where the gist of my speech is, look, you got to be honest with us. You got to be honest with your promoter. You got to be honest with your coach on what you're taking. Now, if there is a situation where there's something you need to take and we might tell you yes, but not that medication. You have to take an alternative, or you have to cut your dose in half. Or you might say that's fine. That's fine. There's no problem. But thanks for telling us just in case you do get knocked out. And I think marijuana kind of falls in that place. Now, there have been athletes out there who say it does help them perform. It helps them relax, or it helps them focus, or it helps them manage pain. I'm not going to disagree with them. I'm not in their mind if they think it helps them, whether it's psychosomatic or it's real. But I have heard a lot of athletes who say I do it and it does help my performance. I don't think I'm the one to say you're lying about that.
Yeah.
I think they're probably telling the truth on that, but that's not the main gist of it. Now, as far as what's going forward, we actually have this steroid and drug testing advisory panel the commission set up late last year to look at different issues. And one of the things they're going to look at their next meeting will be the marijuana situation. And we were looking at the problem with marijuana, as you guys may know, unlike alcohol, when you get a reading on a person, whether they're a fighter or not, it doesn't necessarily tell you when they last used. It could have been 10 days ago. It could have been 10 hours ago. Now, if you fail a test for alcohol, everyone can be pretty sure you drank in the last 10 hours. You didn't drink 10 days ago. So it's kind of hard. It'd be nice if the test was much more specific for all of us, for the fighters and for the commission, that, hey, look, this test proves absolutely specifically he didn't smoke in the last 15 days, or he didn't smoke or he did smoke in the last 10 hours or whatever. So, and I think that's what WADA was trying to do. They even came out and said, look, we don't care about guys who smoked weeks or months before. We care about guys who smoked hours or days before. And they raised the limit to 150. And I think.
And from where is that? It was like 10 times higher now, right?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yep, that's my understanding. They had 15 for their cutoff, and now it's up to 150. It was on the agenda. My understanding is that it was on the agenda for removing it from there. And I think in some sports it may not be a big deal.
Right.
But I don't know how anyone could say
basketball.
If someone,
basketball.
if someone, like I always give the example of the 100-meter dash or something, but I'm not sure if anyone can say in MMA or boxing that whether you smoked a lot of pot or not it would never have an effect on your own safety in the fight. Let's forget about the PD aspect for a second, though. Again, according to some fighters, it does give them an advantage. You got to be careful. You don't want fighters stoned in the ring
Hmm.
or in the octagon. You also don't want them drunk, or you don't want them fighting in there with a broken arm. So you can't ignore it. Even if WADA had taken off the list, I don't think we would have ignored it. But if they can find a better level or a better test or a more specific test, I think that's great. I think they kind of did the homework for us, and that's where we always try to start when we look at our. We have the ability. We're not a WADA signatory. We actually had a conference with Travis Tigert, Dr. Bowers from USADA. And they even said to myself and the commissioner I was with, look, we're a WADA signatory. I don't know if I'm using the term right, but whatever it is. And they said, there's a lot of things we don't agree with in WADA, but we have to follow it 100%. Even if we think there's a better way to do it, we have to follow it. To which I said, well, we don't have that restriction. We can take what's good and ignore what's not good, or we can add to it even. So actually the TRT requirements, we have additional requirements that WADA doesn't even have. But on the flip side, there's certain things that they are able to keep confidential because they're not a government body to the extent we are, and we don't. People all the time, well, how can Kizer tell the press who's on TRT? Well, they make a public records request, and I have to fulfill it, or I'm violating the law. We're a government agency, and these documents are public records. So that's WADA doesn't fall under the public records law. So anyway, back to the issue with the marijuana. So what I think you'll see is I think you'll see the commission say, oh, that's a good idea. Let's go to 150. If that's going to be, we're still going to be able to make sure that people aren't fighting in the condition where they shouldn't be fighting. But on the other hand, we're going to go along with the rest of the drug testing community and have a rule that makes more sense. If the test is more sophisticated or it makes more sense in that regard. I have a lot of faith in WADA, and I think they did a lot of homework on this issue. And I think that's a good thing. And the same thing happened with the TE ratio. For most of their existence, WADA uses 6-to-1. People say, Keith, where'd the 6-to-1 came from? It came from WADA. We adopted it years ago when WADA had it 6-to-1. Now, about 7 or 8 years ago, they switched to 4-to-1 because they were worried about other people getting away with things. But they were very worried going from 6-to-1 to 4-to-1 because they were worried they were going to get some false positives and ruin some careers. Their attitude, from my understanding, is, it's not me. They've ruined a lot of, there's a lot of athletes will tell you how WADA has maybe been unfair to them. With cases where guys had things for hair loss or something where they get banned for 2 years, So we don't ever want to be that draconian. I hope we're not. Some people may disagree, but now with the CIR testing, if someone does break a certain, whatever the ratio you're using, 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 10-to-1, whatever, you can do the CIR testing. Now it's very expensive, so you can't just do it as a matter of course on all fighters. I don't know anyone who does that. If I was only testing 2 fighters a card, it might be something we could deal with. But I'm trying to test 20 guys a card. So, but we have that ability. So we're already looking at that. That's one thing that came out of the panel was, look, go down to 4-to-1. But anyone who's between 4 and 6, do the CIR test at our cost, not the fighter's cost. Not fair to label them, and then wait till that comes back before anything becomes official. As you know, in the day of the internet, you put a story out there that some guy did something wrong and you're wrong about it, and you do a retraction the next day, you still do a Google search for that person, those old stories are going to pop up, and people may not even know about that. It's even worse than the old days with the written word on the paper. So we want to be very careful. I'm surprised that some people are saying, maybe only 1% are going to get falsely accused and convicted. Who cares? It's only 1%. Who cares? I care. So I want to make sure of that. But I think the CIR testing where it's at now, still a relatively new test and unfortunately very expensive, though I think it'll come down, gives us that protection. And I think the same thing hopefully will happen with this new standard that WADA has set for the marijuana. The fighters are protected, both the opponent and the fighter taking the drug. But it's still going to be very important for these athletes to be honest. There's no excuse not to be honest on the forms.
And then another follow-up question. In Nevada, can you get a therapeutic use exemption for marijuana?
We've never had that. I think one of the reasons why I think we don't have it now because it's illegal, even though that the world is changing, and I'm not necessarily unhappy about that. But part of it is if you get a TUE, it doesn't mean you get it for the drug of your choice or at the dosage of your choice. That's very important to note. And here's a lot with the TRT. People get TRT and they'll take as much to get up to the maximum. Some levels are 300 to 1,000. Some say 350 to 1,200, or I think 350 to 1199. I've seen both those standards for where they look for what's considered normal and what's not considered normal. But like I said, we're looking more like 500 when these guys get on TRT. But you still see people say like, oh, if you get TRT, you can get up to 1199. Just don't get above it. Or you can get your ratio up to 6-to-1. And they think that means you can take have 6 times as much in your level, like 6,000 would be your count, I guess, or for that, which you'd be dead. But so there's a lot of craziness out there on that. So you gotta, the point with the marijuana or any kind of drug, TRT or any kind of drug, if you are eligible for the exemption, you have to follow it to the letter. You can't superdose. We had another fighter who was in the process of applying for a TRT, and we tested him, and his levels were very high. They weren't above 1,000, but they were high. They were, I think, 800s or 900s. And I'm like, well, wait a second. Why is this that high? You should be around 500 based on what you're taking and what, in the process. Oh, well, I take my shots on Wednesdays and you tested me on a Thursday morning. Okay. I said, well, you had told me you took your shots on Monday. Because usually if someone's taking their shots every Monday, you want to test them about right in the middle of it. Because that's where the level kind of levels out. So I said, okay, well, I double checked with the people who we're working with, and they said, well, he told us Monday as well. I said, okay, well, I'm gonna test him even more now. So next time I test him, I said, okay, he's on Wednesday. I'll test him on Friday, or Saturday morning, whatever. So I tested him again. He was in the 900s. Well, what's going on here? Well, I took my shot on Friday this time. Okay, you're taking your weekly shot 4 times a week, apparently. You're going to need to if you're going to pursue this, you need to go for the commission. Now, it turns out he ended up not fighting in Nevada, and it became moot to us. But it got to the point where I'm not going to approve a guy like that. I mean, everything else seemed to be in order. So he was a candidate for it. Probably was a legitimate need for it. But then he was superdosing. Well, then you don't get the exemption for that. So that's the one thing I think we'll have to look at if we ever get to that stage where someone applies for, say, medical marijuana. Or we had that with Adderall, for example, with ADHD. There's been some fighters saying, look, you legitimately have ADHD, you need to take something, but you're not taking Adderall or you're not taking Ritalin. You're going to have to take for ADHD. It's not as powerful, but that's part of the purpose. You don't want to be there and get cardiac arrest or have an advantage with it being a stimulant. So it may be a situation where they may be able to take it out of competition, but when it comes times for competition, they may switch to another drug for that. Now, I know in other states I've heard people like, well, I need marijuana. Well, why? Well, I got severe headaches. Well, wait, let's forget about the marijuana. You got severe headaches? You're not fighting.
Yeah.
So sometimes they overthink it, maybe too smart for their own good.
Fair enough. So